Can I start with some things that I think you might not know? Okay, and that's extraordinary, really, when you consider the amount of coverage that is dedicated to, or has been dedicated to, the most recent events between Israel and Iran, the most recent events between Israel and the people of Gaza, and the Middle Eastern politics in general. Can I start with some things that you might not know? That this isn't by any way rhetorical. I fully accept that you might know it. You might know all of it. You might know some of it. You might know none of it. But that's kind of the point. How many states do you think have never signed the nuclear proliferation treaty that Iran has literally announced in the last few minutes it is preparing to leave? The treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. How many countries do you think have historically never actually signed that treaty? Do you want to have a guess? Go on, have a little guess. Okay, wrong. Can you name them? The answer is 4. 4 states have never signed the treaty. That can't change, can it? Until one of them does, it can go down, but it can never go up. Because if Iran withdraws from the treaty in the coming days, as seems likely, then they can't be chalked up as a country that has never signed the treaty. They are no longer signatories. They are ex-signatories, but they would once have been signatories. Therefore, they can never be filed under, never signed the treaty. There are 4 states, and those 4 states are India, Pakistan, both of which have nuclear programs and are known to have nuclear programs. South Sudan, which as far as I know doesn't. And then Israel. How many eyebrows raise at that point? What is Israel doesn't have? Israel's policy for many, many years, this is why on Friday I urged you to look into the case of Mordecai Vanunu, has been a sort of deliberate opacity. It is widely believed that they do, but it has never been formally confirmed. Quite extraordinary to hear and sometimes read people who are paid for their opinions and insights display blatant ignorance of that simple fact. Israel's nuclear program has never been officially acknowledged. They sent Mordecai Vanunu to jail and stuck him in solitary confinement for an extremely long time for bringing attention to it, but it remains a policy of what is described as deliberate opacity, which means they can't sign the treaty, because if you sign the treaty, then the international agencies can send people in to establish precisely what you do and do not have, which is where Iran have fallen foul of the... I'm not very good at acronyms. It's not the IEA or the EIEIO, but it's the IEAEA. Is it? Anyway, the international agency responsible for policing the Treaty on Nuclear Proliferation. Israel is not a signatory, so Israel doesn't get checked up on. Iran is a signatory, so Iran does get checked up on, and has been found in recent years to be remiss. They haven't been disclosing all of the information that the inspectors have asked for. Once again, quite extraordinary to hear and read people who are paid for their insights and opinions display arrogant ignorance, almost as if they don't think it's their job to know that. Israel isn't a signatory, therefore Israel is not inspected by any of the relevant agencies. India, Israel, Pakistan, and South Sudan. That's one of the things you might not know. The other, you would know if you were listening on Friday, but you may not have been, which is fine. I'll need a letter off your mum by the end of morning break, but I appreciate there may have been other demands upon your time. The other is that Benjamin Netanyahu has been personally claiming since 1993 that Iran is mere moments, at the most 3 to 5 years away from developing a fully functional nuclear bomb. I'll say that again because the numbers seem to have eluded bears of very little brain this morning. 1993 is the point at which Benjamin Netanyahu first claimed that Iran would have a nuclear bomb within 3 years. Some nuance. Well, hardly nuance, is it? It's a cold, hard fact. But, of course, the other point you have to make is that the boy who cried wolf was finally telling the truth. After days and weeks of crying wolf, when there was no wolf, when he finally cried wolf, there was a wolf, and it ate all the sheep. And in some tellings of the story, it also ate him. So just because somebody has been shown to have been not telling the truth on countless occasions doesn't mean that they are guaranteed never to tell the truth. But I think it's pertinent, isn't it, that we go back to 1993 to find the first example of Benjamin Netanyahu claiming that Iran was imminently going to be in possession of nuclear weapons. And he is, of course, it may have been 1992, according to one of my correspondents, but hey, stop splitting hairs, Anthony. Benjamin Netanyahu was selling that story many moons ago, 30-odd years ago. Other stuff you might not know that I've stumbled across in the course of the morning's reading is that the Palestinian-dominated areas of Israel are the least likely to have shelters. That was a particularly chilling read for me. It didn't necessarily shock me, but it did make me do a little bit of a double take as I read into that element of the story. We may do a little bit on that, a little bit more on that later. And, of course, the other element of this conversation is the reason why the last agreement that was reached between Iran and the sort of key international players on nuclear matters was terminated by Donald Trump. It's something that, again, I don't know whether I'm being unfair or whether I'm being naive, but it seems to me to be another element that's missing from a lot of the conversation. That was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I told you I'm not very good at it. JCPOA. The JCPOA, or I think more helpfully, the Iran deal, or the Iran nuclear deal. That was an agreement on Iran's nuclear program, and it was reached in July of 2015 by Iran and, wait for it, the P5+1. Do you know what the P5+1 is? This stuff is helpful, right? I mean, it has to be, because otherwise you end up having conversations conducted by people who have no knowledge of any of the salient issues. The P5+1 is the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and the +1 is Germany. So that's China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Why was that binding international legal framework for the resolution of the dispute torn up? Because Donald Trump wanted to tear it up. I suspect a mere caprice. And the fact that Barack Obama had presided over it, had essentially helped to deliver it, meant that Donald Trump was desperate to tear it up. So that disappeared in 2018. How much of that did you know already? How much did you know? How much of that did you know already? Did you know that Israel wasn't part of the Proliferation Treaty and therefore isn't policed by the international agencies? Did you know that the deal with Iran was banjaxed by Donald Trump? Did you know any of that? I don't know. Does it matter? Because here's the question. Nuance. It's a wonderful thing. It's a very important thing. But does it matter when the bombs are raining down upon you? I suspect it doesn't, really. But the bombs are thankfully not raining down upon us. And therefore our commitment to knowledge, nuance and fact remains resolute. You've also got, in the context of Iran's nuclear capabilities, there are 4 words that should be haunting everybody, lining up to pursue what we could call a hawkish position. And those 4 words are weapons, altogether now, of mass destruction. You want to launch an attack upon... Extraordinary to reflect that Iran and Iraq were at war with each other, and we were on Iraq's side. And then we were at war with Iraq, a war that was essentially justified by bogus claims that weapons of mass destruction existed. For the record, my view was always that the people in the UK government persuaded themselves that they did exist. I don't think they went to war on an actual lie. But if the bombs had been raining down on you and your family, that's the kind of nuance that wouldn't matter, right? So where are we left this morning? I think talking about nuance, or indeed knowledge, is probably going to lead us towards a fairly simple question. It's not a million miles away from the question that we asked on Friday. But you know my favourite theory, the theory of footballification, and the way in which I think it has destroyed political discourse in recent years. It may be that it was always thus, but I don't think it was. I sat down with Amber Rudd last week for a forthcoming episode of Full Disclosure. I can talk to people like David Gork or Dominic Grieve, Rory Stewart or various other people with whom I would disagree pretty strongly on many, many subjects. But it wouldn't be like a Kemi Badenoch type scenario where the snarling and the growling and the desperation to bite a chunk out of your opponent subsumes any sort of common ground. That footballification where you see someone screaming at a referee even though it's blindingly obvious that a goal has just been scored or a foul has just been committed because the colour of the shirt matches the colour of the scarf. You can't possibly conceive of nuance. We're back to that word nuance. It's possibly the case, and this is where I think the constituency of people who don't have skin in the game or family in the area is important and possibly helpful. It's possible to hold the view, I think, that Israel's activities in Gaza became unconscionable quite soon after they started. Hamas's activities in Israel on October the 7th became unconscionable the minute the first bullet was fired. But Israel's activities in Gaza became unconscionable. Whether they became genocidal remains to be seen on a legal status, but I think on a philosophical and ethical status that threshold has been reached. I've had some excellent guests on the programme explaining the reasoning behind that conclusion recently. But it's possible to believe passionately that Israel's activities in Gaza became unconscionable some time ago, but also that the attack upon Iran has a justification. I'm not saying that's my belief. I'm just saying it is possible to hold those two beliefs at the same time. And if we sort of cast ourselves a little bit pompously as enemies of footballification, and you apply that analysis to Israel, you are reminded of where these conversations so often go. And it is a dichotomy, isn't it? It's a straight distinction between people who think every single thing that the Israeli administration ever does is evil and wrong, and people who think that every single thing the Israeli administration ever does is necessary and justified. I don't know that I ever would have appreciated that quite as fully as I do if I'd never started doing this job. But if you wanted to go to the mothership of footballification, if you wanted to go to the very essence of footballification, then this would probably be something you'd find. Every single thing that Israel ever does, going back to 1948 and beyond, is absolutely unconscionable. And every single thing that Israel ever does in relation to Arab people, Palestinian people, non-Israelis, non-Jews, is absolutely necessary and absolutely justified. I don't know. Is it possible that one of those two sides is correct? Is it possible? There's loads of people on what we might loosely describe as the left who think that the first position is simply the truth. Whether or not their worldview is clouded by anti-Semitism is moot for the time being, but they exist and that's the view. Every single thing the Israeli administration does is evil and wrong. And then, is it possible the other lot are right? Such is the unique historical status of the modern state of Israel and the Jewish people that every single thing that an Israeli government does, in quotes, defense, end quotes, of Israel is justified and necessary. Those are the two positions. I don't think it's possible that either of them are right. And that is why I will get messages today accusing me of both anti-Semitism and shilling for Israel. You think I exaggerate? I'll find you a couple. I will, because I'm not accepting the analysis that one side is 100% correct and the other side is 100% wrong. And that's why the question of nuance kicks in today. So I'm not sure that there's much point having conversations anymore about whether or not what Israel is doing in Gaza is defensible, because the only people who will contribute to that conversation to say yes are the people for whom Israel can never ever do anything indefensible, the people in Camp 2, the people who believe that every single thing Israel ever does is both justifiable and necessary. For my moral compass, let alone my basic humanity, that is just not true. Most obviously, most recently in Gaza. And therefore, the question of whether or not it's possible that both positions are correct today, that the situation in Gaza is intolerable and indefensible, but the situation in Iran, the attack upon Iran, is strategically justified, morally justified and strategically necessary. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. I could be wasting my time. That's why the introduction is even longer than usual, and I apologise for that. I could be wasting my time. It may be that I don't have the skills. I don't have the rhetorical skills to cut through those two poles, those two extremes. Everything they do is evil, everything they do is right. But that can't be the case, can it? Neither of those positions can be the case. Is this an example of why footballification is the curse of all of these conversations? I think it is possible to argue that the situation in Gaza is intolerable and indefensible, and the situation in Iran is, if not necessary, then justified. Is that just answer that question? Is that a position that you hold? 0345 60 60 973, or is that a position that you can respect even as you disagree with it? Gaza, awful. Iran, not awful. Horrible, because humans are dying. Iran is responding. Israelis are dying. Absolutely terrible. But, war is well, what is war? What is it? No, don't go there. But a necessary evil? War itself? I don't know, but I want you to tell me what you think. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. Is it naive to think that this might be an example of where subscribing to either of those two extremes is both dangerous and damaging to discourse?